and welcome to this special podcast takeover from Amsterdam Dance Event 2022, where I was really lucky to be on the ground capturing insights with several industry leaders from label owners, artists, investors, founders, promoters, journalists, and many, many more. ADE is the largest dance music gathering in the world for professionals and fans alike, and it takes place over 5 days with 600 speakers, 2,500 artists, 1,000 events, and 450,000 visitors from around the globe. And after 3 really hard years for our industry, it was honestly incredible to connect again with stakeholders in the music ecosystem and discuss urgent topics such as sustainability for live events, mental health for artists and professionals, social change, and strategies for the future of electronic music. The dates have been announced for ADE 2023, and I already can't wait for next year. So, without further ado, let's dive into today's conversation with Andrea Magdalena, the founder and CEO of the Shesaid.so movement. Born in Romania and currently based in LA, her work is rooted at the intersections of music, technology, diversity, equity, and inclusion through her role at Shesaid.so. For the last 8 years, she's developed a global community of over 15,000 women, gender minorities, and allies in music, spearheading numerous events, mentoring programs, strategic brand partnerships, and other initiatives across 20 local chapters. In addition to her work at Shesaid.so, Andrea has also spent the last few years developing digital-first experiences, technology products, and strategic partnerships for global brands. Some of the clients she's previously collaborated with include Google, Facebook, TikTok, Spotify, and Mixcloud, to name few. Currently, she also leads community at Coachella as part of their new innovation team, and in today's episode, we unpack a lot about what it means to be a woman in the music industry today and how it is on each and every one of us to create a better playing field. Andrea, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing? Where are you joining us from?
Hi, Farah. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I'm calling in from LA, from my house in Hollywood, after having been in Amsterdam for a week for ADE. It's great to be back, and it's great to be here with you.
Nice. Yeah, exactly. We were going to sit down during ADE, but our schedules unfortunately couldn't align. But I'm so happy we managed to catch up just shortly after, and we can certainly dive into, kind of what some of the key takeaways were that you observed from ADE this year, and also what were some of the critical messages that you wanted to share throughout the week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ADE felt really good this year. I have been personally going for the past 10 years or so, since before Shesaid.so was born, which is what takes up most of my time nowadays. And so in 2019, we launched our first official partnership with ADE that included a couple of talks and a mentoring program. And now this year, we really took that to the next level. ADE offered us a whole space to ourselves that we programmed. We had an entire day of talks and workshops and, networking, kind of ending that with a bit of music. And yeah, it was such a powerful partnership. It really feels like we had the opportunity to touch on some of the most pressing issues in the industry right now through our typical Shesaid.so intersectional lens. There were no talks about being a woman in music, which was very important to me because as a community, I feel like we've matured past that, a basic level of our mission. And instead, we focused on industry topics. We spoke to artists and labels and publishing, what it means to be an artist manager or an agent and how to navigate all of that. Most importantly, we dedicated quite a bit of our programming to Web3 because as a community, we really believe in Web3's potential to democratize the music business, which eventually has, trickle down effects on to women and other underrepresented people in this space. So yeah, it felt really good to kind of bring these more mature ideas to life while still staying true to our original mission.
Amazing. Yeah, you guys you had so much going on in ADE, and it's been also really amazing to see the growth over the last 8 years as well. So, congratulations. And before we go a bit deeper into like some of those things that you touched upon, let's strip it down to the core and begin with, what the mission is of Shesaid.so for our listeners who may not be aware, and also how has it evolved over time since you started it 8 years ago?
It's such a great and timely question because we're just in the process of reinventing ourselves. I guess ADE was kind of the last major project this year, and we will be taking our time over the next, month and a half that we have left in 2022 to reassess who we are and who we want to be moving forward. Rewriting our vision, mission, values, all that kind of stuff, and in order to embrace this new, more mature, slightly evolved version of who we are. But to take a step back, I guess Shesaid.so is a global community of women, gender non-conforming people, and allies in the music industry. We have about 15,000 members distributed across 20 local chapters around the world, majority of which are based in Europe, but also US. We have a presence in India through our Mumbai chapter, South Africa, and a few other areas like that. Shesaid.so was born in London in 2014 at a time when the concept of community was still kind of, mostly a tech concept, I guess. And also at a time when the conversation around diversity and inclusion didn't really exist, or it didn't really exist in the music business in particular, because at the time I was working at the intersection of music and technology, and obviously both industries still struggle with representation. But what was different was that the tech sector was kind of acknowledging this is a problem in the first place and was trying to, at the very least talk about it, if not find solutions to address it. While the music business was, completely uninterested in this topic, period. So when Shesaid.so was born, when I created the Shesaid.so community at the end of 2014, when I was in London, my main goal was, okay, let's firstly bring women together to make sure that this is not just something I'm imagining, that this is a problem that most women out there experience if they work in music, and, get us together to support each other, to help each other out. Because there was a sense of competitiveness. There was a sense of, if there's only one seat at the table for a woman. And so as a result, we will all kind of compete against each other to get it. And obviously, since that point, things have changed drastically. People care about diversity and inclusion now, and equity in general, and, more transparent and fair ways of working together. And so if the conversation has, if we kind of feel like we've achieved our first goal, which is creating awareness about our experience, and start discussing solutions, now that we've kind of got to that point and some solutions are being implemented, but we are still quite far from, our ultimate goal, I guess, which is equity for all. Who are we at this point, and I guess that's kind of what led us to this point where we're at, where we want to figure out a new way to articulate who we are and what we stand for, and where exactly we are in the process of addressing equity in the world and in the music business more specifically.
I mean, it's super interesting because, like when people start a business and they kind of get to a point where the mission has to evolve, there's a point where you have to take that pause and take a step back and reevaluate the core and the and the whole identity moving forward of how to achieve and evolve that mission. So taking that kind of step back, I mean, I know you made an announcement recently that in order to find these, the most thoughtful answers, you need to kind of take that step back to make room for that deep investigation. So what does that like investigation process look like? Like how do you like kind of as a business or as an organization do that?
First and foremost, it will definitely be a collaborative effort. When I was thinking about these questions prior to making any decisions or announcements, I kind of felt, oh, shoot, now I have to figure out, because I was the one, I guess, who gave birth to the community in the first place, who created the beast. I somehow felt that it's also upon me to establish where it goes next. But what I realized is that the reason we have been so successful as a community with purely organic growth, by the way, and fully bootstrapped, the reason it worked, in spite of there not being a very successful business model in place, if you are to think about our organization purely from a business perspective, we're not motivated by profits. We're motivated by our mission more. But what led to our success was how collaborative and community based everything that we did was. And so as we embark on this deep investigation journey, we will definitely work very closely with our team members from around the world to make them a part of this exercise. And we will make the community a part of that exercise as well. I want every person who is a part of the community to feel like they have a say and that they can shape the future of this community that they're a part of. And in fact, it's something that we have always done. On an annual basis, we send out a member survey where people tell us what they like, what works for them, what doesn't, what are the topics and issues that matter most to them, and then kind of reflect those back the following year and developing a strategy that answers to those community needs. So it's going to be a similar process in this case, except we will, really take our time to ask deeper level questions and see where we land.
Nice. Well, I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting and reflective time for your team. So wishing you guys all the best for that journey ahead. Andrea, something we always like to ask our guests on this podcast is dissecting a little bit the meaning of their name. So before we do that, are you aware of what your name means?
I mean, I know what I wanted it to mean when I first came up with it, but
no, like your birth name, not the not the organization. Sorry, yeah, to be clear.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, I think it means warrior, right?
It does, but it also has another thing attached to it, and I'm not sure if you know this, and I think you're from Romania, right?
That's right.
So in Romanian and in Greek, it means man and it also means warrior. And it's really interesting because obviously your whole mission is about gender equality. And so we always find it fascinating because somehow, either subconsciously or not, somehow your name has a kind of deeper level impact. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
That's really funny that you bring this up. I always kind of knew about the double significance. But I chose to focus on warrior and kind of forgot about the man part. But it's funny because I always thought that I probably was a man in a different lifetime. I've been a tomboy my entire life. I didn't have very girly interests as I was growing up as a teenager. And I still, am that person, slightly androgynous, but more and more tapping into my femininity as I get older, I guess. And it's also interesting because me creating Shesaid.so in the first place is a total surprise still. I never intended to be an activist or launch a project that tackles gender equality, but somehow fell into it through my own experience. And I always knew that I wanted to, work on something that brings value to the world. And as I was getting started in the music business, it became very frugal to me all of a sudden. It felt so surface level in a way, because there are elements of the music industry that are so surface level. If you get lost in the industry politics, but if you come back to the art, to the music, which is what brought us together in the first place and why we chose to work in this chaotic business, then you start finding yourself, or finding a much more interesting place for yourself in your career. And so that's exactly what happened with Shesaid.so. It felt that for a second there, it felt like the work that I was doing at the time as an artist relations / community manager wasn't or was lacking some depth, I guess. And I was able to find that depth with Shesaid.so. And yeah, it allowed me to combine my biggest passions, which were technology, which I guess in a way you can kind of say it's a very manly type of space, and music as an art form, but bringing, intersectional ethical values into my work through Shesaid.so.
Yeah, I mean, definitely very interesting, and I can definitely relate. Being a tomboy myself, sorry, but life is about balance. So there's a yin and there's a yang, and and both sides come out in different ways, and they can 100% coexist. And yeah, given that your background with Mixcloud, and obviously your interest in electronic music, I think that's the reason why Shesaid.so has had more of a particular impact on that particular scene. So I wondered like what your key observations were with gender disparity in electronic music, and how it compares to other genres.
Yeah, you're right. Electronic music is definitely a space that we have a bigger presence in. And it is indeed a natural effect of my work with Mixcloud, where electronic was the main, or more popular genre on the platform, as well as on a personal level. I love electronic music. I love that feeling that you get on the dance floor where you can really lose yourself, unless someone, grabs you from behind or tries to spike you. And I guess it was that experience as a music fan, first and foremost, that led me to being aware of gender disparities in this space in the first place. First as a fan and as a, I guess, dancer, and then as a music industry executive, I suppose. And because electronic music is very much evolving around nightlife, where substances are consumed, some of them legal, some of them not, there is a particularly higher risk for women who operate in this space. On one hand, again, as a fan, if you're someone who goes to a party, a rave, festival that is centered around electronic music, where this sort of substance consumption exists, your experience might be severely impacted by other fans, particularly male. And those dance floors tend to be particularly male because of the nature of this space. Slightly more aggressive, kind of darker colors, even from a branding perspective, not just from a sound perspective. It feels like a much more aggressive, kind of male-centric part of the music ecosystem. And then you have the behind the scenes side of things, where a majority of producers, a majority of studio engineers, mixing engineers, and so on are men. And so the music that they make, I think, as a result of that, speaks to men more than women to some extent, and reflects and refracts the kind of, I guess, vibe. I don't know how else to put it. That it feels aggressive towards women. And then an even deeper step back into the business side of electronic music, where, let's face it, ultimately it's about selling alcohol. That is, the whole business model revolves around DJs playing at a club where people consume alcohol. And ultimately they're motivated by that, and men tend to spend more at the bar. Men tend to be the ones buying the drinks for the women. Again, I'm speaking in very traditional binary terms here. But, the commercialization, can't pronounce it correctly, but you know what I mean. The commercial aspect of electronic music is, something that is deeply problematic. Not towards women only, but towards the people who created this space in the first place, Black and brown, LGBTQ plus bodies in Detroit and Chicago, who still aren't reaping the commercial aspects of the business. Still, it's definitely getting better, but a majority of the electronic music commercial value resides still with cis white males in Europe, basically. And it's funny that we ended up talking about this, because it's a great parallel with that evolution of Shesaid.so that I was talking about earlier, where you really have to look at the music industry in a holistic way. And then you start seeing that it's not just about women being discriminated against or harassed or so on, but, it's truly all aspects of the business that kind of lead to a lack of representation, or to things like unfair record deals towards artists. It's because the music business as an industry was built, let's say, in the 50s. That's when the first record labels kind of came up, and record deals were being offered to people. And it was purely, what's the word I'm looking for here? Predatory, like artists were stripped away from their rights. And it tended to be, there tended to be a lot of female and POC type of artists who got the worst deals. And so then if you start looking at music industry history from that perspective, you start seeing the connection between equity, or gender equity, more specifically speaking, and other problems that currently permeate the music business that don't necessarily have a direct connection to gender or social impact, but are obviously linked. And so we want to address these issues from this more holistic place moving forward. And ADE, our programming at ADE, really enabled us to tell that story, without even mentioning the word woman in any of the topics that we explored.
Super interesting. There's so much I want to unpack from what you said, because basically, I became a journalist because I felt like I had a duty from what I observed as a DJ. And this is going back like 2014, so almost 10 years. And already at the very beginning of my career, and I became DJ like 2010 or something, but obviously going out and all that prior to obviously becoming a DJ as well. And it's interesting because of course the whole culture of nightlife is about hedonism, and the more hedonistic, the more like intense, whatever the music is, the more hedonism it promotes, and then in turn the venues make more money. But also people come out for a release, and and for people who are not in this industry day in and day out, of course, like they, like a lot of people live for the weekend, so that is that is their fundamental release. But at the same time, I also had friends that I was shocked, a friend that I was very shocked by, who I remember was a very famous DJ in Mykonos at the time. Like everybody knew him. He was this Greek guy. And one day when he found out I was learning to DJ, he was like, "But women can't DJ." And I was like, "Are you serious? Like you know me, and you actually commend me on my music selection, but you think I actually don't have the physical ability to become a DJ? I mean, that is just ridiculous." And it's interesting when people that actually can have the audacity to say that to you. And at the same time, also other experiences like on the dance floor of, I mean, when you're a professional in the music industry as well, you wear two hats, because on the one side, you obviously enjoy the dance floor. Like this is what we all somehow got influenced by, and we should take time to enjoy that music. But at the same time, there is a feeling, like of not being safe, because as you mentioned, there are people who find it completely acceptable to touch your body part, and it doesn't belong to them, and they don't know you, but that's their first interaction point with you, and it's shocking. And then on a behind the DJ booth more perspective, again, people may assume that you take drugs and therefore may want that and think that it's okay, and might just even put it in your drink without you knowing. And it's just interesting. It's not interesting. It's shocking what's acceptable to a lot of people, and who don't question our fundamental human rights and values. But then on the other hand, from what you said about the music and what how maybe when it's more male dominated, the type of music that gets played, and like when you see female DJs sometimes, I think it's interesting when you can tap quite deep into an emotive state. I mean, the journey can be really interesting when you can go deeper into electronic music. In all of this, it's a big contrast to what electronic music actually promotes and stands for, which is the value of the dance floor promoting freedom. And when you look at like other genres, like hip hop, for example, it's completely different. And I'm not talking like maybe old school hip hop, because I think that's a different time. But like modern day hip hop is very different, the way they promote women, and it's just like it can be a bit distasteful. And the dance floor is it's a very different. It's like there's so much sexual energy on the dance floor, whereas on the electronic music dance floor, it's not necessarily primarily about that. So when what do you think about other genres, and do you think that how can you make an impact on actually changing the biggest mindset shift, which is safety on the dance floor? Like, how can you change and promote a shift in that mindset from other people? Hey, I hope you're enjoying today's show. And of course, if you are, a little review or share with your friends would be much appreciated. But I just want to take a quick pause to share some interesting news that Mission Makers has unexpectedly grown into becoming a boutique podcast agency. And for the last year and a half, we've secretly been producing content for some high-impact brands, from tech unicorns in Silicon Valley to disruptive companies at Davos. So if you're thinking of starting your own show and you're looking for some help, then send us a message, because we would absolutely love to bring your story to life and help you amplify your content while really connecting on a much deeper level with your audiences. Now, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question that we're all trying to figure out, and what we have learned is that there is no one answer, because that would be easy if we just figured out what it is and then we would implement it and boom. But unfortunately, discrimination and inappropriate behavior on the dance floor and the studio are much more systemic issues that, start from, it started thousands of years ago with, continued years of patriarchal organization of our society, and all this collective memory over the last, few hundred years is deeply rooted in how we organize ourselves as people, and will take a long time to unlearn, and then bringing it all even closer to home. It starts in our homes as children. If you, I mean, in some cultures, it's still regarded as a loss to give birth to a daughter instead of a son. It's that deeply rooted, right? Or more close to the Western sort of thinking, when you have a baby boy, you'll buy him blue clothes and trucks and cars and construction and science and dinosaurs. And if it's a girl, you give her Barbie dolls, and you want her to be pretty and princess like and all that stuff. So these notions of what makes a woman and what her role is in the world are very deeply ingrained, from a very young age, if not, in our DNA as humans. So there is a lot of undoing to be done and unlearning to be done in order for us to truly get to the point where these things aren't an issue on the dance floor or in the home or in the classroom or whatever. But bringing it back to the music industry, we do have, music has so much power to influence. And we can try to make those changes on the dance floor, however we can. Even if it starts with something as simple as, putting code of conduct kind of messaging in the bathrooms, at the club, or including that sort of messaging of what we stand for beyond, hedonistic consumption of music or escape. We also want to do that in a way where everyone feels safe and, here's what you should or should not do. But if you don't put these kind of ideas in front of people who, let's face it, most type of discrimination out there happens on an unconscious level. If you make people conscious of these issues, you make it more likely that they will happen less and less. And one thing that was very important for us at Shesaid.so in particular was to make men a part of our mission. Because, as women, sometimes it feels like you're preaching to the choir, essentially. Yes, of course, we know that we're experiencing these issues. Most of, the perpetrators tend to be straight white males or straight males, period. So we need to get them on board with our agenda. We need to make them aware of what we're experiencing and then turn them into allies, because a man is a lot more likely to listen to another man if they're talking about things of this nature. If I, as a woman, go and complain about, being grabbed at the club, it will just sound like will I even be believed in the first place? And that's already, we're entering, more extreme territories of harassment. And they happen a lot still in the industry. And, a way to address that is by getting the men on board to stand up for us, and be our advocates.
Yeah, I think part of it is, I mean, 100%, it's not men versus women. We all know, and it should never be that way. And therefore, it's really important that men are in this conversation with Shesaid.so as well, because at the end of the day, it's what, as you said, sometimes it's unconscious, but the reason it's unconscious is because it's been normalized. And therefore, in the spaces that those conversations are taking place, in the locker room, wherever, like, that people should have the ability to speak up against something that's not fundamentally right. It goes against the protection and safety of either gender, actually, at the end of the day. And I think, I'm sure you probably thought about this, but I'm sure that, in your long-term trajectory, there could be so much impact you could have at like other conferences where it's not just dance music, but it's other music genres as well, where like there is also, shocking kind of similarity. I know that it's hard to quantify a lot of the impact, and it's hard to also quantify, like in truth, like the amount of DJs or producers. But there was an interesting statistic from the USC School of Communication in California that said 2% of music producers are female in this industry. And it's just interesting because obviously this industry is inherently forward thinking by nature, and it's innovative. Look at all the music tech, the music that gets made, but yeah, obviously that is so unacceptable and so behind. And it's similar to motorsport as well, because again, motorsport is so much about innovation, but at the same time it's like even less. That figure is less than 2%. So it's interesting, the polarized opposites there. But as obviously someone who's working so like tirelessly to change this, why do you think, that is the fact? And like, how can, as an industry, how can we take changes to change this fact? Is it just having more opportunities? Is it, artists really going out of their way to provide and pave the way for the next future talent in the industry? A combination of all those things. Like, yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely a combination of different efforts that come internally and externally from the music industry. With that statistic, I think it's worth mentioning the fact that the Annenberg Institute looked at, I believe, the top 100 Billboard chart, and so kind of draw the conclusion that 2% of the producers who make the most popular music that people listen to today, only 2% are women or identify as women. And so what happens here is a massive gap between, what ends up being popular, where most of the money in the music business at. You might have heard that it's extremely difficult to develop a sustainable career in music, whether you're an artist or an executive. There's years and years of free labor and even spending your own money and, compromising by taking on other jobs until you get to a point where music actually pays for your life, And so there's a huge gap between people who are trying to experiment, and there's the independent and underground aspects of music that are a lot more diverse and inclusive. Very experimental, truly are artistic, creative, and innovative, if you may, but there is no money, there is no funding in that space. And so at some point, people either give up, at some point, people have families, and so they don't even get the opportunity to get to that level where I guess they are officially part of the popular music ecosystem. And there are similar studies that show I think in the music business specifically, if not more widely speaking, at a junior level, when people just enter the workforce, things are quite balanced. It's more or less a 50-50 representation, unless you're probably looking at a very specific niche industry. But things get worse as you progress, as you get to the mid and senior level and C-suite levels of any business. Things become less and less representative of women, of people of color, LGBTQ plus, and so on. And there's a combination of things there. On one hand, ageism; on the other, the potential for motherhood, even if you don't end up having children. There are these are the questions that every employer asks themselves. Oh, okay, how old is she? When is she planning to have kids? Because I'm going to have to pay for 2 years of her maternity leave or whatever. So instead of promoting a woman, they promote their male counterpart. Or if you're a creative, an artist, ageism is such a thing. All the A&Rs, all the sort of gatekeepers in the music business focus on young talent because they know it takes about 9 years to break a career, to get to a point where all that investment starts, recouping tenfold, basically. So preference tends to go for, younger women who look pretty, who have the ability to invest in their beauty, I guess. And it's a very archaic and fucked up way of looking at things, but that's just very much still how the music business works. And until we change those mindsets, we won't be able to see substantial change. And the good news is that we are starting to see these thought patterns change, and it's reflected by consumer behavior, by Gen Z behavior, who are now, I believe, the majority of the consumer age bracket, I suppose. And they are coming into the space in a much more, with a much more intersectional and equity and impact driven mindset than maybe my generation of millennials, and definitely the generation before us didn't have.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And you touched upon something there that's really important, I think, to highlight, which is the financial aspect. And whether you're beginning at the beginning stage of your career, or you're, well into your, I don't know, 7th year hustle, and it's still not your full time because the money hasn't sustained you. I think there's two sides that people really, who are listening to the conversation, should take away. And one is, as a fan, like, please understand the impact of not paying for music, because that is like what creates instability and all this huge like pressure on performances, which is also has a huge impact on sustainability and the fact and mental health as well, because touring around the world however many days a year is extremely grueling, and it's not for everyone as well, and it just shouldn't have to be for everyone. It shouldn't be the only way to succeed, although of course the metaverse is opening up a lot of interesting questions around that, but we're not there yet. We're still early adoption phase. So when people kind of take for granted what streaming has done or what piracy has done, I think it's very important to go out of your way to support artists in every shape or form. And secondly, as a promoter or as somebody who's responsible for employing an artist, don't try and get their services for free. I mean, at the end of the day, I think if you're an up and coming producer or an artist, whatever, you should have okay, year one, I'm going to take that I'm going to take the free gigs because I need to make that CV portfolio, whatever. But after that, it's like, you should never just do it because you feel like you should. And then you're making it like acceptable for other people too. So you're bringing the price down for others in the stakehold. So it's just, the whole thing is just like eating away at each other. And like, at the end, then there's also the, who knows, but the amount of, we see it in sports, the amount men might earn versus women. And so there's so many things that I think people maybe not so aware of when it comes to the industry. And you just see this lifestyle that looks so great, but actually there's a lot behind. And talking about the metaverse, I'm interested to know if you thought about, obviously, like the way that music's now being consumed in the newer generations, partly also as a result of the pandemic, is very different, and it's there's been interesting articles recently I've seen that like has placed the emphasis on the artist having standing for something, or like being very vocal about whatever it is that they're passionate about. And it's not necessarily the music first. So it's like, if I follow someone on TikTok, it's because they do XYZ, or so there's this kind of like let's say pressure for artists to not just be about the music, right? And we kind of know that anyway in this social media age. But as we kind of shift towards this, also the consumption experience of music in the metaverse, have you thought about the kind of online hate and abuse that we've seen, which is quite toxic in Web 2, and like how that might change or can be changed in Web 3 to protect fans and industry executives?
Well, unfortunately, I think we are at a point in the development of the metaverse, whatever that may mean to people, and where the same issues that we've been experiencing in the Web 2 world are kind of translated, if not even exponentially felt in the metaverse or in the Web 3 space. And that is, again, a reflection of the fact that the Web3 space continues to be traditionally male dominated, straight, white and Asian males are basically dominating this space. And even it goes down to even the code that they write and speaking of artificial intelligence, how all these AIs that are being built, ultimately they're being coded by majority of men with those kind of tendencies that they then continue to propagate in the Web3 space. So I think it goes back to the same issues that we're tackling in the music industry as well. Representation, it starts with representation behind the scenes as well, ensuring that the gatekeepers and builders in the Web3 or in the Metaverse space are, diverse and people coming from all walks of life. Maybe there's a need for some sort of Metaverse committee, ethical committee to exist and help shape this up, because we're already seeing how the need for security and privacy in the Web2 world that continues to govern our lives and influence, some of the most core aspects of our society, like presidential elections, and not having a set of standards in place creates room for a massive a gap in power and who gets to hold that power. And we already know who tends to hold these kind of powers, because it's a mimic of generational wealth, which presently tends to be in the hands of particular or particular groups of people. And so by democratizing or introducing some standards and criteria in place by people like us, I guess, that justifies the existence of communities like Shesaid.so. If it wasn't for us kind of ruffling the feathers and asking the questions that nobody wants to answer because they're not necessarily in line with profit margins, but they are in line with human growth potential, then I'm afraid we will land with a metaverse that is just as bad, if not worse, in fact, since people feel like they can, act even more brash when they're behind a screen. That their behavior can be even more extreme and polarizing. And so I think, it's important for communities like ours to bring our ideas and our values and our mission into these new technology spaces.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, the exciting part of Web3 is the fact that we have a chance to get it right from creating these guardrails from the beginning. But as you touched upon, what if we don't, because of the fact of who's designing these platforms, and ultimately also, who has that, like, if you look at the Instagrams, the Facebooks, the Twitters, in the end, like, these platforms are just not doing enough to prevent human trafficking, to prevent online bullying, all of these things as well. So yeah, it's a lot to unpack. And what would be your advice? It's a crazy, chaotic world we live in, obviously. So, like, if you're an emerging female artist, what do you think are the 3 things that you would tell that person to navigate this industry currently, with so much going on, of uncertainty, of like everything we've talked about?
Yeah, it's hard to capture the complexity of the music industry into 3 tips, but I guess the first thing would be patient and kind to yourself. It's going to be hard. Like, just acknowledge that and know that there will be lots of obstacles on the way. And just when they happen to arise, stay calm and patient and kind to yourself. Try not to blame yourself if anything goes wrong. The second one is build a strong community around you. Like, this cannot be expressed enough, and not just because of our community and the impact that we've had, but the music business is a highly social industry where you need those initial super fans, if you want, and they can be friends and family, to truly support your career, whether it's financially or emotionally or whatever that may be. So yeah, having a strong network around yourself is key. And then thirdly is, and this sounds kind of cliche, it goes back to authenticity and not being afraid of taking risks and embracing new technologies and just putting stuff out. I would suggest, don't, and that's more of a startup kind of mentality that I've embraced by working in technology, is just put stuff out. Don't expect it. Don't wait until it's absolutely perfect. And as artists, as creative people, I know that many, encountered this problem where, how do you know that your artistic, creation is ready? Like, it will never, you can constantly work on it and refine it. Um, but on a more practical level, yeah, just put stuff out, share things on social media, test thing, see what works, and continue to do more of that until you truly feel like you found your voice and your identity. And if your voice and identity change over time, that's okay too. Just, share the story of how that happened with your community, and they will stay along for the ride.
Yeah, no, some really great tips, and I can definitely resonate with many of them. And I would just add, like, with the it is really hard sometimes to let go of music because there's so much you can do, right? It has have infinite possibilities. But it's a mental challenge as well to finish, to just finish what you start, and like to be proud and to let go, because you don't want to be sitting there 5 years later and like, and nothing's going. I think there's an importance of like taking time to develop, of course, like that's really important. So you shouldn't rush just because the industry's putting that pressure to like have those tracks, because of many reasons. But you also need to be able to you had to know when to move forward. And as you say, we all evolve. Like, we can all look back at artists and think like how different their sound was when they first came out, how it continuously evolved. Like, even you look at Dead Mouse, like the Dead Mouse of today is not who he was in like 2005, and like so many artists. So yeah. Andrea, I know we're almost out of time, so final question I would like to ask you. What are some of the misconceptions behind the work that you do? And I appreciate we could be here for another hour talking about that, but on a high.
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception that I struggle with is, and you've mentioned it earlier in our conversation, is this idea that we've created an us versus them ecosystem. And it's really not about men versus women here. And I think with Shesaid.so in particular, we've done a pretty good job of making men feel welcome in, the way we talk about things. And if you look at our current manifesto, it's not very rigid because it acknowledges, that you need to put the equity question into context. You can't just force a 50-50, parity across things, because life isn't as black or white, and we didn't want to put that pressure on companies, or people. But yeah, it's definitely not an us versus them problem here. That's the main thing I want to clarify. And then the second one for me would be, and I think I mentioned it earlier too, is this idea of the girl boss movement. Our name feels very feminist too, but I refuse to identify with that type of feminism that kind of, in some way, does us a disservice, because I personally cannot take it seriously. It is empowering and it is great, but it's so on the girly side that, the tomboy in me, the warrior in me, cannot identify with it and cannot take it seriously. And so Shesaid.so specifically is not about that kind of feminism. It's about something a bit more intersectional, that looks at equity and impact in the music industry, from a much more holistic perspective beyond gender.
Really well said. Really well said. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share as final closing thoughts, or do you think we've covered quite a lot to take away for today?
We've covered a lot, and there is yet so much more to say at the same time. I don't know who, your typical audience is, but just the final thought to leave whoever's listening with is, yeah, I already said it in my tips, I guess, but just being kind and patient and mindful as you navigate the industry that you're in, the life path that you're on. Be kind to yourself and to others, and everything's gonna be okay.
Absolutely. Andrea, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Farah.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed having these conversations. If you want to grab a copy of today's show notes, then head over to missionmakers.com/ADE, where you'll also find notes from all of our previous episodes. And if you're interested in talking to me about future opportunities at ADE, producing podcasts, or coming down to some of my music and motorsports events, then you can reach out to me at Mission Makers or at dj.n1nja on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you as ever for listening. Until next time, keep it laser focused.